January 1692. Salem Village, Massachusetts. Two young girls start having fits. They scream. They contort their bodies into impossible positions. They claim invisible hands are pinching them, biting them, choking them. The local doctor examines them and delivers a chilling diagnosis. The evil hand is upon them. Witchcraft. Within months, 19 people will hang from the gallows. One man will be crushed to death under heavy stones. 4 more will die in prison. And it will all start because of teenage girls playing a dangerous game that spiraled horrifically out of control. This isn't a story about actual witchcraft. This is a story about lies, hysteria, personal vendettas, and how quickly an entire community can descend into murderous paranoia. This is about how children's accusations became death sentences, how neighbors turned on neighbors, how the most religious community in America became the scene of one of history's deadliest witch hunts. This is the Salem witch trials. 25 people dead, hundreds accused, an entire town consumed by fear. And at the center of it all, teenage girls who discovered that crying witch gave them the most dangerous power imaginable. To understand how Salem descended into madness, you need to understand where it began. And it began in the home of Reverend Samuel Parris, the village minister, in the winter of 1692. Salem Village in 1692 was a small Puritan community in Massachusetts, deeply religious, isolated, and living under constant fear. Fear of Native American attacks on the frontier. Fear of losing their charter and autonomy to the British crown. Fear of disease, crop failure, and divine punishment for sin. The Puritans believed in a world where Satan was real, active, and constantly working to corrupt souls. They believed witches walked among them, making pacts with the devil to destroy God's chosen people. In this atmosphere of fear and religious extremism, Reverend Parris's household became the epicenter of catastrophe. Living in his home were his 9-year-old daughter Betty Parris and his 11-year-old niece Abigail Williams. Also in the household were 2 slaves brought from Barbados, a man named John Indian and his wife Tituba. During the long, dark winter months, Betty, Abigail, and several other girls from the village would gather at the Parris house. They were bored. Puritan life was strict and joyless, with no entertainment permitted. Dancing was forbidden. Games were sinful. Reading anything except the Bible was actively discouraged. For teenage girls with no outlets for their energy or curiosity, the tedium must have been suffocating. According to later accounts, Tituba entertained the girls with stories from her Caribbean homeland, tales of magic and fortune-telling. The girls allegedly experimented with divination, trying to see their future husbands by dropping egg whites into water and interpreting the shapes. In Puritan Salem, this was playing with fire. Any dabbling in the occult was considered opening yourself to demonic influence. In January 1692, Betty Parris and Abigail Williams began exhibiting strange behaviors that would change history. They would suddenly freeze in place, unable to speak. They would crawl under furniture, making strange noises. They screamed and claimed they were being pinched and bitten by invisible attackers. Their bodies twisted into contorted positions that seemed physically impossible. The local doctor, William Griggs, examined the girls and found no physical cause for their afflictions. He gave the diagnosis that sealed Salem's fate. The evil hand is upon them. The girls, he declared, were bewitched. Once this diagnosis was made, the pressure on Betty and Abigail became enormous. Who was bewitching them? Who had made a pact with Satan to torment innocent children? The entire village demanded answers. Reverend Parris, terrified for his daughter and his reputation, pressed the girls relentlessly to name their tormentors. On February 29, 1692, the girls finally gave names. 3 women: Tituba, the slave from the Parris household; Sarah Good, a homeless beggar who went door to door asking for food; and Sarah Osborne, an elderly woman who rarely attended church and was involved in a scandalous relationship. These were perfect first targets. All 3 were outsiders, marginalized women with no social power to defend themselves. Tituba was enslaved and foreign. Sarah Good was poor and aggressive, with a reputation for muttering curses when people refused her charity. Sarah Osborne was old, sick, and had violated social norms by living with a man before marriage. On March 1st, 1692, warrants were issued for their arrest. The three women were brought before magistrates John Hathorne and Jonathan Corwin for examination. This wasn't a trial. It was an interrogation designed to extract confessions. Sarah Good denied everything. She suggested Sarah Osborne might be the witch instead. Sarah Osborne also denied the charges, pointing out she hadn't even been to church lately, so how could she have appeared as a specter to torment the girls? But then Tituba did something that changed everything. She confessed. Under pressure from Reverend Paris, possibly beaten, certainly terrified, Tituba told the magistrates exactly what they wanted to hear. Yes, she was a witch. The devil had appeared to her as a tall man in black and forced her to sign his book. She had seen the book, and it contained the names of 9 witches in Salem. She described a conspiracy, witches flying through the night, meeting in secret, plotting to destroy the Puritan community. Tituba's confession electrified Salem. If there were 9 witches, that meant 6 more were still hiding in the community. The witch hunt was no longer about 3 marginal women. It was about uncovering a vast, satanic conspiracy threatening everyone, and the girls, having tasted the intoxicating power of making accusations, were just getting started. Within days of the first arrests, more girls began having fits. Ann Putnam Jr., 12 years old, joined Betty and Abigail in their afflictions. Then 17-year-old Elizabeth Hubbard, 19-year-old Mercy Lewis, and 20-year-old Mary Warren. Eventually, a core group of about 10 girls and young women became the primary accusers, but Ann Putnam Jr. would emerge as the most prolific, ultimately accusing 62 people of witchcraft. The girls performed their afflictions publicly, creating spectacular displays that terrified the community. During examinations of accused witches, they would shriek and fall to the ground convulsing. They claimed they saw the accused specter attacking them at that very moment. They mimicked being choked, their faces turning red. They showed bite marks appearing on their arms. They acted as if invisible hands were pinching them all over their bodies. Sometimes they appeared to see terrifying visions invisible to everyone else, pointing and screaming at empty air while describing demons and specters that only they could perceive. The magistrates took these performances as absolute proof of witchcraft. After all, why would children lie about something so serious? The Puritan worldview held that children were innocent vessels, incapable of such elaborate deception. This belief in spectral evidence became the foundation of the trials. The prosecution argued that the devil could take the shape of an innocent person's specter to torment victims. So even if you had never practiced witchcraft, your specter could be tormenting the afflicted girls without your knowledge. This created an impossible situation where accusation equaled guilt. If the girls accused you, you were guilty. If you denied it, you were lying and therefore guilty. If you confessed, you were admitting guilt, but might save your life by accusing others. The only logical response for survival was to confess, and then feed more names into the grinding machinery of the witch hunt. Martha Corey made the fatal mistake of expressing skepticism. She was a devout church member who suggested publicly that the girls might be lying or mistaken. Her skepticism marked her for destruction. In March 1692, the girls promptly accused her of witchcraft. During her examination, they performed their most dramatic fits yet, screaming that Martha's specter was biting them, tearing at their flesh, choking the life from their bodies. Martha maintained her innocence throughout, pointing out the absurdity of the accusations. But her skepticism only made her seem more guilty in the eyes of the magistrates. She was arrested and thrown into jail to await trial. Then the girls accused Rebecca Nurse, and this accusation shocked the entire community. Rebecca was 71 years old, deeply religious, respected throughout Salem, and known for her charitable works and gentle demeanor. She was partially deaf and had trouble hearing the accusations against her during her examination. When she was examined, Even the magistrates seemed uncomfortable. 39 community members signed a petition testifying to her good character and Christian virtue. But the girls performed their fits with renewed vigor, claiming Rebecca's specter was attacking them right there in the courtroom. The magistrates, despite their obvious discomfort, ordered her arrested. If someone as saintly as Rebecca Nurse could be a witch, then anyone could be. No one in Salem was safe. The accusations began targeting wealthier, more prominent citizens as the girls grew bolder. John and Elizabeth Proctor, successful tavern owners with considerable property, were accused after Elizabeth had publicly dismissed the girls' fits as fraud. She had said they should be whipped for their play acting. The girls made her pay dearly for that skepticism. The pattern was becoming clear. Many accusations followed personal grudges, property disputes, and long-standing family feuds. The Putnam family, whose daughter Anne was one of the primary accusers, had conflicts with several accused families over land boundaries and inheritances. Accusations of witchcraft were becoming a convenient weapon to settle old scores and seize valuable property. By May 1692, the jails were overflowing with accused witches. The colony's governor, William Phips, returned from England to find Massachusetts in chaos. He established a special court of oyer and terminer to hear the cases, appointing judges including William Stoughton, a harsh Puritan who became chief judge and most aggressive prosecutor. The first person to go on trial was Bridget Bishop, a woman who operated a tavern, dressed flamboyantly, and had been accused of witchcraft years earlier. She was an easy target. On June 2nd, 1692, she was found guilty based primarily on spectral evidence. On June 10th, Bridget Bishop was hanged from Gallows Hill. She became the first execution. She would not be the last. After Bridget Bishop's execution, there was a brief moment of hesitation. Several ministers, including the influential Cotton Mather, wrote a letter urging caution about spectral evidence. They warned that the devil might deceive the court by appearing as an innocent person's specter. But crucially, they also said the trial should continue. This half-hearted warning was quickly ignored. Chief Judge William Stoughton was convinced of a vast satanic conspiracy and determined to root it out completely. The trials resumed with renewed intensity. On July 19, 1692, 5 people were hanged in a mass execution: Sarah Good, Rebecca Nurse, Susanna Martin, Elizabeth Howe, and Sarah Wilds. As they were led to the gallows, Sarah Good's own 4-year-old daughter Dorcas was sitting in jail, also accused of witchcraft and imprisoned for 9 months in conditions that would permanently damage her mental health. Sarah Good, standing at the gallows with the noose around her neck, was given one last chance to confess. Reverend Nicholas Noyes stepped forward and demanded she admit her guilt. Sarah's response became famous throughout New England. "I am no more a witch than you are a wizard, and if you take away my life, God will give you blood to drink." Years later, Noyes would die of a massive internal hemorrhage, choking on his own blood. The Puritan community saw this as Sarah Good's dying curse fulfilled. Rebecca Nurse's execution was particularly heartbreaking. She had actually been acquitted initially when the jury found her not guilty. But when the verdict was announced, the afflicted girls immediately had violent fits right there in the courtroom. Chief Judge Stoughton, unwilling to accept an acquittal, ordered the jury to reconsider their verdict. Under enormous pressure, the jury changed their verdict to guilty. August 19th brought 5 more executions: John Proctor, Reverend George Burroughs, John Willard, George Jacob Sr., and Martha Carrier. George Burroughs was particularly significant because he was a former minister of Salem Village, and the girls accused him of being the ringleader of all the witches. During his execution, something remarkable happened. Burroughs perfectly recited the Lord's Prayer from the scaffold, which supposedly proved innocence since witches were believed incapable of speaking holy words without error. The crowd began murmuring, expressing doubts about his guilt. But Cotton Mather, watching from horseback, quickly addressed the crowd. He reminded them that the devil could appear as an angel of light. The executions proceeded. September 22nd, 1692, was the largest mass execution of the entire witch hunt. 8 people were hanged on a single day: Martha Corey, Mary Easty, Alice Parker, Mary Parker, Ann Pudeator, Wilmot Redd, Margaret Scott, and Samuel Wardwell. Mary Easty, Rebecca Nurse's sister, had written a heartbreaking petition from prison. She knew she was going to die and accepted her fate, but she begged the authorities to examine their methods so that no more innocent blood would be shed. Her words were ignored completely. She was hanged alongside 7 others, but the most horrifying death wasn't by hanging at all. It was death by crushing. Giles Corey was 80 years old, a farmer who had initially supported the trials until his own wife Martha was accused. When Giles himself was accused, he made a calculated decision. He refused to enter a plea of guilty or not guilty. Under English law, if you didn't enter a plea, you couldn't be tried. And if you couldn't be tried, the court couldn't seize your property. The court decided to use a torture called pressing to force him to plead. They laid him on the ground and placed a wooden board across his chest, then began adding heavy stones one by one. The torture lasted 2 full days. According to legend, each time the sheriff asked if he was ready to plead, Giles's only response was more weight. On September 19th, 1692, Giles Corey was crushed to death. He never entered a plea. Because of this, he was able to will his property to his sons-in-law. Even in death, he beat the corrupt system. By the end of September, 19 people had been hanged, 1 man pressed to death, and 4 more had died in prison. At least 25 people were dead because teenage girls had pointed their fingers and said one word: witch. By fall 1692, the accusations had spiraled completely out of control. Over 150 people had been arrested and jailed. The afflicted girls were accusing people across an ever wider circle that now included some of the colony's most prominent citizens. They accused successful merchants whose property would be valuable prizes. They accused ministers' wives who had been considered above reproach. They even made the catastrophic mistake of accusing Lady Phipps, the wife of Governor William Phipps himself. When the governor's own wife was accused of witchcraft, he suddenly took a much more critical look at the entire proceedings. Other prominent citizens were beginning to express serious doubts. People were noticing incidents that raised suspicions about the girl's authenticity. In one revealing case, a girl claimed a witch's specter was attacking her at a specific location. When a bystander struck at the empty air where she was pointing, the girl suddenly cried out in pain. The obvious question was how hitting empty air could injure her unless she was faking everything. Mary Warren, one of the afflicted girls, had a crisis of conscience. She was a servant in John and Elizabeth Proctor's household, and her employers faced execution partly because of her accusations. Mary began telling people she had lied, that all the fits were fraudulent, that she and the other girls had made everything up. But the moment Mary started telling the truth, the other afflicted girls turned on her. They accused Mary Warren herself of being a witch. She was arrested and interrogated. Terrified of being hanged, Mary quickly recanted and returned to making accusations. The message was clear: you were either an accuser or you were accused. There was no neutral ground. By October 1692, several prominent ministers published statements questioning spectral evidence. They pointed out the obvious problem. If the devil could appear as anyone's specter, then spectral evidence proved nothing. Without spectral evidence, the entire structure of the trials collapsed. Governor Phipps finally took action. On October 29, 1692, he dissolved the court of Oyer and Terminer and forbade any further arrests for witchcraft. The witch hunt was officially over. A new court was established in 1693 with stricter rules. Spectral evidence was no longer admissible. Of the 52 remaining cases, 49 people were acquitted outright. The other 3 were convicted, but immediately pardoned by Governor Phipps. The machinery of death had finally stopped, but it had left 25 corpses in its wake. So what happened to the afflicted girls who had caused all this death? Did they ever admit what they had done? Did they show remorse for the 25 deaths they caused? The answer is disturbing. Most of the girls never publicly acknowledged any wrongdoing. They simply moved on with their lives. Betty Paris, who had started it all, was sent away to live with relatives during the height of the trials. She grew up, married, had children, and lived until 1760. She never publicly spoke about the witch trials. Abigail Williams, Betty's cousin and co-conspirator in the initial accusations, disappeared from historical records after the trials. Some historians believe she died young. Others think she left Salem and started over with a new identity. Her fate remains unknown. Mercy Lewis, one of the most dramatic performers during the examinations, also disappeared from records. Whether she died, moved away, or simply lived quietly, no one knows. But Ann Putnam Jr., the most prolific accuser who had pointed her finger at 62 people, did something remarkable 14 years later. In 1706, Ann Putnam stood before the congregation of Salem Village Church and issued a public apology. She was now 27 years old. Both her parents had died. She was alone, caring for her younger siblings, and apparently suffering from crushing guilt. Her confession was read aloud by the minister since Anne was too distraught to speak. It remains one of the only surviving apologies from any of the accusers. Anne claimed she had been deluded by Satan himself. She said she had been an instrument for the accusing of several persons of a grievous crime, whereby their lives were taken away from them. She begged forgiveness from God and from the community for the innocent bloodshed because of her accusations. But notice what Anne didn't say. She didn't admit to deliberately lying. She claimed she had been deceived by the devil, not that she had knowingly made false accusations. Even in her apology, she maintained she was a victim too, a victim of demonic deception. The historical evidence strongly suggests the girls knew exactly what they were doing. There were too many coordinated accusations, too many cases where the girls accused people who had offended them or their families. Ann Putnam's family had land disputes with the Nurse family. After Anne accused Rebecca Nurse and her sisters, the Putnam family stood to benefit from seized property. The question that haunts historians is, why? Why did these girls start this? Were they bored teenagers seeking attention? Were they manipulated by adults with their own agendas? Were they caught in lies that spiraled beyond their control? The truth is probably a combination. It likely started with some girls experiencing unusual symptoms, possibly psychological in origin. When the diagnosis of witchcraft was made, it gave them attention and power they had never experienced before. Young girls in Puritan society had no power, no voice, no autonomy. They were expected to be silent, obedient, invisible. But as afflicted victims of witchcraft, suddenly they were the center of attention. Magistrates hung on their every word. Adults catered to them. They could point at anyone and have them arrested. This power was intoxicating, and once they started, they couldn't stop. Each accusation required another to maintain credibility. Each execution raised the stakes. If they admitted they were lying, they would be confessing to murder. So they kept going, kept performing, kept accusing, trapped in a nightmare of their own creation. The aftermath of the Salem witch trials brought shame and recrimination to Massachusetts. In 1697, the General Court declared a day of fasting and prayer in atonement for the executions. Samuel Sewall, one of the judges, publicly confessed his error and guilt in a statement read from his church pulpit. He took full responsibility for his role and asked God's forgiveness. But most of the other judges never apologized. Chief Judge William Stoughton, the most aggressive prosecutor, never expressed any regret. He continued his legal career and later became governor of Massachusetts. He went to his grave insisting the executions had been justified. In 1702, the Massachusetts General Court declared the trials unlawful. In 1711, the colony passed legislation restoring the rights and good names of the accused and providing financial restitution to their heirs. £22 was paid to Rebecca Nurse's family. £15 to John Proctor's widow. These payments were insultingly small, but they represented official acknowledgement of wrongdoing. The executions left deep scars on Salem. Families were destroyed. Children grew up without parents. Property was seized and lost. The community's reputation was ruined. For generations, descendants of victims and accusers lived side by side, the weight of that history hanging over them. But perhaps the most important legacy of Salem is what it teaches us about mass hysteria, the dangers of unchecked authority, and how easily fear can transform into violence. The Salem witch trials happened because a community was already primed for panic. Economic instability, political uncertainty, fear of Native American attacks, religious extremism all created a perfect storm. When the witch accusations began, they provided a scapegoat for all these anxieties. Witches explained why crops failed, why children got sick, why life was hard, and eliminating witches gave the illusion of control over an uncertain world. The trials also demonstrate how accusations alone can become evidence. Once someone was accused, defending yourself became nearly impossible. Denial was taken as proof of guilt. Confession brought survival but required accusing others. The system was designed to perpetuate itself. Salem teaches us to be skeptical of mass hysteria, to demand actual evidence before accepting accusations, to remember that children can lie, that authority figures can be wrong, and that communities can collectively descend into madness if they abandon reason and justice. The site of Gallows Hill is now marked by a memorial installed in 1992 for the 300th anniversary. It features stone benches inscribed with the victims' names and execution dates. Visitors can sit and reflect on what happened here, on how ordinary people became victims of extraordinary injustice. 25 people died because of lies. Only one accuser ever attempted to say sorry. The Salem witch trials remind us that the most dangerous lies are the ones people want to believe. The community wanted to believe in witches. They wanted to believe teenage girls couldn't lie about something so serious. They wanted to believe they could identify and eliminate evil. These beliefs led them to commit murder in the name of justice.